The connection between the Moldavian, in particular Putna monastery, and Ukrainian-Belarusian chant traditions of the 16th, 17th century seems very logical, given the territorial proximity of the Moldavian and Ukrainian lands and their belonging to the common Eastern Christian cultural space. This assumption is supported by the political, economic, and ecclesiastical contacts established between the neighboring peoples at that time. At the same time, it turns out that it's not so easy to materialize this connection, to find the common features in the musical manuscripts, in their structure, repertoire, and so on. Why? What are the reasons for it? Firstly, the comparative analysis of the chant repertoire is complicated because of the use of different musical notations. The famous manuscripts of the Putna monastery represent the Middle Byzantine notation. In the Ukrainian and Belarusian lands in the 16th century, the znamena semiographia were used. Now I try to... the znamena semiography were used. Few manuscripts of such type have survived, and today it's impossible to decipher them reliably. The new Kiev staff notation has emerged and gradually replaced the znamena semiography at the turn of the 16th, 17th century. Secondly, the Ukrainian and Belarusian chant tradition is anonymous. The authors' names are not indicated in the manuscripts. Quite often, the chants are named by their origin: ethnic, Greek, Bulgarian, Wallachian chants, or more locally, by the name of city or monastery: Mezhegirsky, Ostrovsky, Great Hermitage chant. And so let's start with the historical information that testifies to the contacts between the Moldavian and Ukrainian singers and monasteries. The Moldavian voivode Alexander Lapușneanu was a generous patron of the Orthodox Church. It's known that in 1558, the Lviv Assumption Church Brotherhood sent to him the ambassadors with the request to help to rebuild the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church, which burned down in 1527. The Moldavian voivode didn't refuse and became its patron. In his correspondence with the Lviv fraternity, there is information that is extremely important for the musicologist. He invited the deacons from Lviv to study the Serbian and Greek chant, probably in Putna monastery, and informed that the deacons from Przemyśl had already arrived. The Moldavian chant tradition is based on the Byzantine one, so it's clear why the Moldavian voivode invited to study the Greek chant. The Greek chant appeared in the Ukrainian and Belarusian church musical manuscripts in the 16th, 17th century, and lasted in the liturgical repertoire until the end of the 18th century. The accompanying Roman Greek, as well as the Greek verbal text transcribed in the Cyrillic alphabet, evidence the Oriental origin of this chant. Example, this one. It's written not with Byzantine, but with znamena and Kiev square staff notation. The Greek chants in the Ukrainian and Belarusian chant tradition have not collected in the separate books. The manuscripts with the traditional Slavonic melodies, not all, about 10%, contain the additional Greek chants. Most of these manuscripts have only 1, 2, sometimes 3 Greek compositions. Trisagion, Cherubic hymn, and Axion Estin are the most common. If we pick up together the Greek chants scattered through the manuscripts, we will not get a complete liturgical cycle. There are few manuscripts with a dozen or more Greek chants. It was cultivated in the monasteries, in particular in Supras, Kuteino, Lavriv, Măneava, and so on. Heirmologia of Măneava contains the richest collection of the Greek chants. In the manuscript of 1675-1676, There are about 30 chants, and in the Heirmologia of 1684 and of 1731, there are about 20 in each one. Probably the Greek language chants repertoire of the Great Hermitage had a different origin. About directly Greek, namely the Mount Athos' roots, belong from the preface of the Manava manuscript of 1684. Its author, the Nevais Varnava, tells about the monastery's founder, Saint Yevgeniya Ignatenko, who brought, quotations, the sweet chanted words collected from the different flowers in the Holy Mountains monasteries. Saint Yevgeniya Ignatenko had been living on Mount Athos for 12 years. But the Moldavian and Wallachian sources are also traced. The Manava monastery's co-founder, Saint Theodosius, began his spiritual life in the Putna monastery. We learn about it from the Vita of Saint Yevgeniya Ignatenko, written by his contemporary Ignatius. Saint Theodosius was born in the Ukrainian village Pitrich, and his spiritual father was the famous Athos elder Ivan Vyshinsky. At this picture, now we can see the two founders of the monastery. On the left, we can see the Saint Theodosius, and on the right, the Saint Yevgeniya Ignatenko. And on the bottom of this picture, we can see the Great Hermitage. This picture is from the manuscript of Great Hermitage. And this is Ivan Vyshinsky. He was the spiritual father of Saint Theodosius. The Moldavian voivodes were patrons of the Great Hermitage. In 1648, during the reign of Vasily Lukov, I believe that it's correct. The Suceava monastery was added to the Praetorian of the Great Hermitage. The Moldavian voivoda Gheorghe Ghica gave to the Manava monastery a harvest tithe of town Chernivtsi. Recently, the Romanian researchers have defined the two manuscripts of the 17th century, which are kept in the library of the Putna monastery, Putna 60 and Putna 74, originate from the Great Hermitage. They contain the Vita of Saint Yevgeniya Ignatenko and the spiritual testament of Saint Theodosius, other of the Manava monastery. Probably the Ukrainian monks brought them to the Putna monastery after the destruction of the Great Hermitage in 1785. The distance between the Manava and Putna monastery is only 130 kilometers. The histories of Ukrainian music written in the previous 20th century didn't contain the answer about the origin of the chants with the remark Greek from the Ukrainian and Belarusian Heirmologia. The question whether or not they are really Greek remained without answer because they are all anonymous. As a result of our comparative study of the Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Byzantine manuscripts, their significant number were attributed. Among them, there are the colophonic works of the prominent Byzantine composers of the 13th, 15th century. Sorry, one moment. Данечка, выйди, пожалуйста. Among them, there are the colophonic works of the prominent Byzantine composers of the 13th, 15th century, such as Ioannis Glikis, Ioannis Kladas, Manuel Chrysafis, and less known, such as the monk Longin, Joachim Harsianitis, Manuel Gazis, Anthimos Lavriotis. The Ukrainian and Belarusian manuscripts include the slow exegesis, archi-exegesis of the early Byzantine colophonic works. Now we can see the list of this composition that we managed to attribute. In the given list, those colophonic works which are presented also in the musical manuscripts of Putna Monastery are located in red. Let's pay attention to the Joachim Harsianitis' communion verse of Sunday of the second mode, Penitetum. In the manuscript of the Putna Monastery of 1545, which is kept in the Central University Library of Iași, this chant is recorded without the author's attribution and with two texts, Penitetum in Greek and Избавление посла Господь in the Church Slavonic language. The author's attribution was made by Dimitri Konomos. Firstly, let us remember that the author's name is always lost in the Ukrainian and Belarusian musical manuscripts. Secondly, this work rarely appeared in the Byzantine manuscripts. However, it is in the Ukrainian and, as it turned out, in the Putna manuscripts. Third, the Church Slavonic text adopted to the work of Joachim Harsianitis isn't a translation of the Greek text. The Sunday communion verse in Greek accompanies the Christmas communion verse in Church Slavonic. This is a case typical for the bilingual chants of the Putna musical manuscripts. The example of such a practice is found also in the Ukrainian Manava manuscripts. The communion verse of Saturday in Church Slavonic, Блажен яже избрав, was ascribed under the Greek text of the Manuel Chrysaphisis communion verse of Sunday of the first mode in Manava Heirmologia of 1684. So the authorization of the colophonic Greek chants in the Ukrainian and Belarusian manuscripts give us the possibility to compare the Greek repertories in the early Moldavian and Ukrainian-Belarusian chant tradition, to define the peculiarities of the Greek repertories with codification with Byzantine normatic and Kiev staff notations, and to materialize the connections between Moldavian, especially Putna Monastery, and Ukrainian-Belarusian chant tradition. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Yevgeniya, for the wonderful presentation. Well, I think we have a lot of time to comment on it. Are there, please, Yevgeniya, if you want to make it so that we can see the speakers now, is there anybody who wants to ask Yevgeniya something about her presentation? Yes, Professor Nicolae Gheorghiță, please.
Hi, Yevgeniya, congratulations for your excellent paper. I learned a lot about this great tradition of Slavonic mixed with Byzantine chant. So, do you have in mind which were the most copied compositions in these anthologies of Ukrainian origins? I mean, which were the most important compositions that the copyists used used to copy into the manuscripts? Because sometimes this type of copying reflects some common practices also in this part of Romania. For instance, if you remember, I gave you some clues in the last conference in Thessaloniki. You know, there are some very, very interesting musical manuscripts, probably of Ukrainian origins, which include some compositions in, of course, in Slavonic language, but in Kievian notation, and some of them even in Greek language, but using Kievian staff notation. These manuscripts are nowadays kept in the Romanian Library in Bucharest. Probably you are very aware about these manuscripts. Yeah, that was my comment and this very small question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't know this manuscript because do you mean the Kalistrat Octoichos or no?
No. I think no. If I remember well, it's the manuscript dates back to the mid of 17th century and has entire collection of hierubica with in Greek language and some action estin, an entire series of action estin.
It's very interesting. Unfortunately, I don't have it, and I want to ask if something can some access, because I don't know. I have not access to the manuscripts, so it's a little bit problem because I know that I can find some chant in the manuscripts, but unfortunately I didn't find the access for this manuscript. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, please, Father Abraham.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I have also another question. If you are aware about this Bulgarian chants from Aniava manuscripts, are there the first manuscripts of Bulgarian chants in Ukraine? Or if you know better about this subject?
I think that the manuscripts from Aniava was called the manuscript of Bulgarian chant. And also another manuscript from Lavriv Monastery in Ukraine, it's the western part of Ukraine, also was called the manuscript of Bulgarian chant with the chants in Greek and Slavonic and Russian. And I know that there are a lot of thoughts about this question, what is the Bulgarian chant? And there are a lot of hypotheses about this theme, but I believe that we have to do the comparative study with Greek chants and with Slavonic chants to understand what it is really. So it's my opinion, but I understand that we have a lot of questions, and now we have not answers at these questions.
Thank you.
Yes. Is there any other question for Yevgeniya? If not, then may I ask you, Yevgeniya, about the form these Greek chants are recorded? You said that it's with a slow exegesis. Could you please develop this theme? Because this is really also the core of our conference now. We are very interested to see how they actually chanted those compositions.
Yes, of course, I have some scores with the comparative analysis of these chants, but I'd like to say that I started to prepare the work because I find the action distinct from the manuscript of Putna from Russian library. And we have action distinct in our manuscripts in two versions, slow and quick. Slow and quick. So it's very similar to the slow version, but really I find it only 1 week ago. And so now I have no material to show you, but it's very interesting because this action theme, short version, it's with Greek text, and in the Aniava manuscript it has prescription Wallachian. But the same action theme with Greek text, there are lots in different Ukrainian manuscripts without description Wallachian, and the version, the early version of this one in the Manava manuscripts. So I think maybe it was, and then I find that the short version of Axionestin in the Ukrainian manuscript, it is the same that we can find in Greek published book today. So it's very interesting. We have so lots of questions about this theme, and I think that I have to work 1-2 months, and then I can show some materials, of course, because it's very interesting.
Yes, yes. It sounds really great. Very, very nice. So is there any other question, please, for Mrs. Ignatenko? Yes.
Sorry, I'm not used with these microphones. If I understood well, there is or not in Manava manuscripts some short exegesis? There is or not?
Yes, there is. The Manava manuscripts, at this paper, I stress that I told you about the colophonic verbs that I managed to to find the region, but there are a lot of different chants with Greek texts, the liturgical chants, Axionestin and Aios of Theos, of course, a lot of versions, and among them there is short versions, of course.
Did you study also the Resurrection Troparion? The Resurrection Troparion, Elena Tonceva has an article about this, about the great Scythia of Maniava, where she compared the version from the Maniava Heirmologia with Eustathius' version of Resurrection Troparia, and she could find some interesting connections between this. Do you know anything about? Do you study that?
I know about this article, but I don't check this Troparion.
No, okay.
Unfortunately.
I see.
Thank you very much, because now we have a big perspective to study this theme and to comparative study Ukrainian and manuscripts from Manava, and really it's very, very interesting.
Indeed.
Yes, I think that this comparative study with those pieces in Kiev notation and the comparative study with the Byzantine sources, the post-Byzantine sources and so on is very, very important for our field. And I think in the future it can enlighten many questions we have, whether it's about short and long exegesis or different versions, different compositions, about the abilities of the notation at that time, how to approach it, how to render it.